below average, we would talk about under-aided countries or aid orphans. You might saw this term already. And on the other side, you have aid darlings, where development cooperation providers really like to spend their money for strategic reasons or other reasons. And, what is quite interesting, by the way, we did a study on under-aided countries, and we went to, I think, 4 of those countries, and all of them were not aware that they are on the watch list of the OECD list of under-aided countries. So, what do we want to say here? Aid orphans might be looked as a symptom of weaknesses in aid architecture and slow aid coordination, because if you really coordinate on the level of headquarters, you might avoid a situation where countries are under-handed. Just rushing a bit on impact and consequences of aid fragmentation, multilateral agencies. Just to highlight it, because those trends are really quite important. What we see over the last couple of years is that multilateral institutions, that they have a structural change in what kind of funding they get. And what we saw over the last couple of years is an increase of earmarked money. So donors are saying, I give to you, UNDP or World Bank, this amount of money, but we have conditions. You need to spend it in those 3 countries and in this specific sector. And if you do this kind of earmarking, you undermine, in a way, of course, the rationale of what multilateral institutions are about. Yeah, you have a governance board; they should decide upon, etc., etc. But this multi-buy aid is really very much increasing and again contributing to those concepts. Let me just continue so we see a number of other impact dimensions and consequences. How to overcome fragmentation. I'm going to pick up maybe some aspects related to cross-country fragmentation, to within-country fragmentation. I'm not really talking about global aid architecture. I would love to do it. So the global partnership of effective development cooperation and ECF is again platform development cooperation forum, which is in charge of development cooperation there. And again, we have a proliferation of fragmentation of global and international platforms who are in charge or not in charge of norms and standards. And reflecting a bit on overlapping international region mandates. So, what to say about how to overcome fragmentation? I think there is, when it comes to aid fragmentation within countries, one overriding principle based on the Busan outcome document. So Busan in 2011, we had an important high-level meeting of the former OECD Working Party on aid effectiveness, and the key term in this regard is managing diversity. And managing diversity in this regard means partner countries should have the lead to overcome the negative aspects of fragmentation. And let me just give you one example, and I think it's again an example with a reference to Rwanda. Rwanda is in this regard outstanding. Is there anybody from Rwanda, by the way? No. Because Rwanda really has a very strong leadership role in this regard. And during my time in Rwanda, there was one clear message coming from the government. They were saying, look, EU, you have one nice principle, what is called division of labor, and this principle is saying each donor should focus on a maximum of 3 sectors and we want to implement it in our country, but not only for European countries, but for all donors. And this is point number one, yeah, and rather an announcement. Announcement number two, we are going to decide for you which are the sectors for your country. I can tell you that was a quite difficult exercise, because what I was saying already, normally donors like to stay in their sectors, but they took the leadership, and it's difficult. And I think the typical African country, I'm sorry to say this, but they are trying to avoid this kind of leadership role. Yeah? It's rather, let's try to please all donors, and whatever you want to offer to our country, we take it. And that's probably not the best way, at least in terms of managing diversity. Multi-actor coordination, that's another point that because we have so different actors, private foundations, we have the group of South-South cooperation providers, etc., etc. We need to find different ways how to bring together those actors, also the private sector as such. And this is really a challenge in many fora. And that applies to the country level, but also to international. I think in principle terms, the use of multilateral channels is one way how to reduce the negative aspect of fragmentation, because you pool your resources. So if you would agree we just double our contributions to multilateral institutions, that would avoid a number of transaction costs and other negative aspects of fragmentation. The merge and reduce of development channels, we have again a number of options. Let me just pick up one. As you might know, there was a nice fashion on program-based approaches, quite often called budget support, in a number of countries for a while. And that was really one way how to reduce the number of implementers, for example, because donors were, at least to some extent, distributing their aid to the national budget of the partner. And for several reasons, almost all donors stopped their budget support activities 5-7 years ago. But it was a very efficient way how to bring together aid. So those are some examples how to overcome fragmentation. And let me, this is one example for the United Nations, but maybe one on the European Union. And let me pick out one or two. Code of conduct on division of labor. That was what I was saying already, that the European Union introduced as a principle that European member states should focus on a maximum of 3 sectors per country. This is still a challenge. So, and this decision was made more than 12 years ago. It's still a challenge. But maybe let me just highlight one aspect, one programming. European Union, in a very general sense, is really great when it comes to technical approaches, how to overcome specific issues, including aid fragmentation. And joint programming is one of those almost perfect approaches how to overcome it, because the European Union is saying what we are trying to do is to do our programming cycle jointly, all European member states plus European institutions. That's normally a quite significant number of actors. And we even harmonize those programming cycles based on what the partner country is saying to us. And that's really important because, for example, the financial year of a partner country should be the starting point, and this should be the basis for all of us. And joint programming is in principle saying we on a European level are doing it. In practical terms, this is not really implemented, or it's a very small number of countries, because you have very strong incentives for non-coordination. One example, Myanmar, I mentioned it already, was that normally small European donors would like to see more coordination, because then you have, more influence, even if you provide small money. But the bigger contributors, they are normally saying, "Oh, I'm that big in this country, I can't really use this overall framework." So they are trying to find a way how to avoid joint programming. So this is really one main weakness, that we have a political economy normally in place of donors, which is not really in favor of joint programming. But at least in terms of technical approaches, we have a number of ways how to do it. Outlook, just briefly, country ownership is still fundamental, especially when it comes to overcoming fragmentation. So if we have strong ownership, this will reduce collective action problems, and this is the best way how to manage the diversity in terms of actors, in terms of instruments, etc. Bargaining power and donors' readiness to conform crucial. So one main weakness of the last couple of years of the international community is, from my perspective, that we have a decreasing momentum for aid effectiveness. This has to do with a number of topics. One main topic is that we have, I think, quite good principles in place based on the Paris Declaration from 2005. Yeah? They were introduced by the OECD Working Party on aid effectiveness. And the whole process was transformed in 2011 during the Busan high-level meeting, I mentioned it already, to a new platform which is called the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, because there was a strong wish to make the former OECD approach more inclusive and to bring on board especially South-South cooperation providers. And the intention was we create a new platform, and this is the GPEDC. At the same time, the new GPEDC is now in place since the end of 2011, but we do not have any longer those quite strict principles on aid effectiveness. That's point number one. Point number two, I think a number of main driving forces for aid effectiveness are not any longer that strong. Let me give you maybe one or two examples. United Kingdom, Great Britain, they were all the time very pushy when it comes to aid effectiveness for a number of years. And as you might know, in the UK we have a quite different situation. Development cooperation is much more used for national interests. Yeah, it's a strategic objective to use development cooperation for national interests. And of course, one national interest is now how can we avoid the negative aspects of the Brexit. And if you take this as a starting point, you have a quite different approach from the past. So what I'm saying, aid effectiveness and the readiness of donors to commit to those principles, that's a quite different situation today compared to the situation 5 or even 10 years ago. I think I will stop here because I used already 1 hour. So thank you so much for your interest, and looking forward to your questions and remarks.
Oh, this last thing.
Huh? Yeah, that was.
Yeah, you can use more, several minutes.
No.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
now we can start to discuss. Okay, Pedro, you are so hurried.
Because I will leave after my questions. But, I think it's very systematic and it's very 2 or 3 questions. It's very broad, but I do want to get your you have skipped the delivery as well, the UN reform.
Yeah.
So how like Germany or you evaluate the UN reform process in terms of improving the effectiveness, harmonization, all this, avoiding fragmentation. Because my personal observation I think is quite limited. And many people still think in the new context, I think the new Secretary General of UN is having another sort of UN reform agenda. I think we saw that maybe yesterday China was criticized the UN putting up a lot of reform agendas to sort of improve the effectiveness. But I think in the past the effect is not that great. That's mine. So I want to say this. And then the second one is how is like the USA's perspective on fragmentation, so how they are doing this, and is they are an active partner in the process, or what is their sort of policy. And then the third one, I think you have touched upon is like under all this new global context, there's this national interest. Now I think it's more coming back in the field, not like in the MDG field stage. People are talking more about how reduction, about development. Now it's more and more people are talking about their own national interests in the UK and many other European countries, also in China too. So if you have a domestic agenda behind the aid, how you can overcome these fragmented issues? That's my 3 questions. Thanks.
Okay, because Ted will leave soon, so you can discuss.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Very challenging. Let me try to address those aspects briefly. UN reform process. Yes, in a way, I think it's a never-ending story. Yeah? I did my PhD thesis in the mid-90s on the reform of UNDP. So, and at that time, you can go back to the 60s and you find evidence for it. So it's sometimes even frustrating. Yeah. But the main point for me is it's not so much a question of the United Nations, but of the member states. If member states would really commit to a reform process, then it would take place. That's point number 1. Point number 2, at least to some extent, we have again a situation where traditional conflicts between different country groups in the United Nations are coming back. Yeah? Let's say G77 as a typical developing country group representation in the UN context is playing again a more important role, and this is rather a symptom, but which is we do not have a situation where different parties are coming together, but rather it's a situation of conflicting interests. So my main starting point for a reform process would be, let's try to centralize the budgets. Those budgets need to be earmarked for specific purposes, and based on this, you will provide the funding to the specific funds and programs. And this would trigger a very important reform process. US perspective, Trump administration, of course, is doing things differently. We expect to see this budget cut of more than 30%, and the United States were always very much in favor of an approach where national interests were really important, but now it's even more. So this has consequences on the fragmentation of aid, because United States were always a little bit outside of the club of like-minded donors in favor of aid effectiveness. One very strong example is the whole discussion on program-based aid. United States were never ready to provide budget support. I mean, they have, if you're looking really back, they provide something like military aid, which is similar to the budget support, but with the developmental purpose, you do not really have budget support for developing countries, because aid is normally used for those national interests, and one national interest is to use the capacities of the US private sector. So looking at food aid, that's really very important in this regard. Looking at consultancy services coming from the region around Washington DC, that's really important. So the United States were always quite different in this regard. I think we have one main example when it comes to the United States, which is quite different. That's the MCC, the Millennium Challenge account, which is really trying to address governance issues in developing countries. So MCC is a quite positive innovation introduced by the first Bush. More national interests, yes. This applies to the United States. I mentioned it. Let's say from a European perspective, what is really important is that migration pressure is now a very important driving force, and I think we can look at migration in many different ways, but this is a very strong interest of European countries to manage migration also with development cooperation. And I think this is quite close to a national interest approach. Yeah? And this has implications in many regards in terms of allocation patterns. So what are the countries most likely to receive aid in the future? What are the sectors? And migration will, at least for European countries, be one or maybe even the most important dominating factor how to allocate aid resources for the next couple of years. So that will change a lot. So this is just Europe, but also probably with some consequences for multilateral institutions.
Okay, thank you. So, Stefan, thanks so much. I'm really pretty interested in the topic. Actually, when I'm listening to your presentation, I think of a project that just applied from the central government. The topic is about how to promote multiple stakeholders' participation in the China's aid to improve its, the effectiveness. So far, that in China it's just the government-to-government interaction that will promote more NGOs' participation. So, when more actors involved in the aid process, it would be the problem of fragmentation. So it seems that to me that in the established donors, they're talking about how to reduce the disadvantage of fragmentation. In China, it seems that we increase the stakeholders. But on the other side, we also blame so much about the fragmentation. But it's from the donors' side. It says, okay, we got competition. Actually, I try to take over from your resources, but you start another kind of business. So we get competition. So what I mean, I show these cases is trying to see that if we really want to talk about fragmentation, probably we need to take deep into this empirical data to see what it really means. For example, the type A of fragmentation, type B of fragmentation. So from a different empirical data, probably we can give more stories behind. For example, I'm on a country that would like to receive aid. Then many of your donors coming to my country, and if all of you don't have such a long procedures to apply and to control of my country, you just send me the aid as a gift. So I welcome all of you. Why I need to. So that's what I mean. It's maybe related to Ted's question about actually there is a motivation behind the donor. Maybe that's the problem. So that's not the problem of fragmentation, but the problem of what you mentioned in the book. It's a public service reform, based on the results-based reform. So I just want to share this kind of comments to promote the discussion. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe you want to respond.
Up to you. We can collect a couple of.
Maybe we can listen to some comments or questions from our African friends. Especially, Steph mentioned the recipient country's perspective. Okay, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Shema Munda
From
Tanzania.
Oh, Tanzania.
Thank you, Professor, for your systematic presentation. It's very interesting presentation. I want to understand two things. First, there is this concept of aid dealing and the aid offering countries. I want to know the reason behind why some countries they are choosing to be more supported and others just marginalized. Actually, I'm not completely denying the effect and contribution of the AIDS, international AIDS, to the development in Africa. And actually, I do not support the concept of AIDS in African countries. When you take the example of these countries, the orphanage countries, the countries that receive daily AIDS, their economic growth are very steep and equivalent. It shows it's elevated compared to the other countries that are receiving a lot of AIDS. So in real sense, in my view, it's like the AFC or the donors that are providing these aids put it in a way that does not helping, does not support the growth of the economy in a particular countries. There are the things that you mentioned about the internationalization of the development cooperation. That it's often that the donor thinking, what will work in Germany will work in Tanzania, or what will work in China will work eventually in US or in Brazil, which is wrong. Every country has its own priority. It has its resource. It has manpower that is different from others. And then it can't be like if China is concentrating and prioritizing in maybe a railway or infrastructure, and then the USA should also prioritize in infrastructure. It might concentrate on prioritizing education, depending on the need of the population and the economic base of the country. And often the donors does not regard on that. They have their priority, and it does not really matter if the particular countries relying, benefiting from those priority as donors. Because in Africa, you might found that although they are in the aid-bearing darling countries, they get support on maybe democratization, forcing democracy, governance, which is not really helping people. Actually, all this money are encouraging corruption. They are all getting into hands of the leaders, political leaders, and they are gone. They are not supporting any kind of government out there. That's why you see they are not helping us. So I just want to know the reason behind why some African donors choose to support much more some other countries and they just marginalize that.
Okay, maybe another round we can collect 3 and then. Okay.
Thank you for your lecture. I have 2 questions. The first is, could you explain the major reason for the fragmentation of aid? Is that like the fact that aid is basically or fundamentally political instead of economical? So you give the example of A380, so it is economical, so it's a kind of division of labor. But because aid is basically political, so that's my second question. It's related, is fragmentation of aid likely to be avoided? And in your lecture, you touched the South-South cooperation. Do you think South-South cooperation is a pushing factor for the fragmentation? And if so, is the 3-party cooperation is a way to reduce the fragmentation? Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Zhang Cuizhen from China Foreign Affairs University. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for great questions and remarks. Maybe I take the first and the third one together because it's pretty close, I think. I think your observations are absolutely right. We have a situation where I would call it the political economy of development cooperation providers is really important. So in a way, we are looking at development cooperation in a way, how can development cooperation be organized in a perfectly wise way and based on international rules and norms, etc. And I think this kind of thinking makes sense, just to search for the best way how we deliver it. At the same time, we have very strong incentives which are not in line with those developmental purposes. Yeah? One topic I mentioned already, aid coordination. We have very strong incentives for non-coordination. Yeah? One strong incentive, for example, is that we want to be visible as a donor with your own contribution. So you do not want to flag this project, this was funded by the European Union or by an international organization, but you want to make sure this was funded by maybe China or Germany, because you expect that you get a much better reputation in the country, for example, if everybody knows, oh, those great things were funded and done by Germany. So this is one main aspect, visibility. Another one is if donors have economic interests in the context of development cooperation, you can just enforce those economic interests if you are in charge of the whole process. Yeah? If UNDP is doing it, you can't really control how the procurement process is organized, things like that. Yeah? So what I want to say is the whole aid effectiveness debate, how to overcome fragmentation, etc., is always based on the idea we want to get the most efficient and effective and transparent aid contribution which is possible, but this assumption is quite often wrong, yeah? Because aid has also to serve other purposes. Yeah? That's pretty clear. But we need to confront, I think, aid providers by saying, look, if the main objective or what you are doing is the development of this country, we have a way how to do it. Yeah? But you are doing it differently because you are trying to combine it with other interests, and there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off. That's how it is. The multiple stakeholder approach, multi-partner, multi-actor approaches, I think that's really interesting to see that this is becoming more important for the Chinese discussion. As you probably know, we have these multi-partnership approach discussions on many levels.
not at least in the United Nations. And I think the main fact in this regard is that we see a number of innovations based on multiple actor constellations. For me, just a few examples quite prominent in this regard. IT, the extractive industry initiative, which is based on a multi-actor constellation, where you find private sector actors, so companies active in minerals. You have civil society organizations, you have governments, etc., etc. That's a constellation where you normally would think, oh, that's a big conflict, because mining industry, they have their own views about, Eastern Congo, etc., etc. But in reality, it was possible to find some kind of agreement, despite the fact that we have very different actors. C40, the Cities 40 that's a group of cities around the globe very much committed to mitigation and adaptation to climate change. That's a similar approach where you bring together very different actors. So what I want to say is